My classic shelf tour is a hodgepodge, a big mix of books, and I wanted to share the ones that I have loved so much or have made such an impact on me that they are taking up precious real estate on my shelves. While I love reading new books, classics really have a special place in my heart. So much so that I have 3 shelves that are full of what I would consider classics. In preparation for making this video, I looked up what is the definition of a classic because I thought I knew what it was, and then as I started to look at my shelf, I realized that maybe my criteria for what made it on my classics shelf wasn't correct. So I looked it up. It's generally 100 years old is the general thought of how old a book should be to be a classic. But another interpretation I read said as long as it has an impact on multiple generations, that could be considered a classic. The other part of this is that it needs to have cultural significance. So something like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest or Uncle Tom's Cabin, those books have cultural significance. You can hear people make reference to Moby Dick in common conversation, and so that you know that book by Herman Melville carries cultural significance. The other part to this is that it needs to have literary strength, and so by the writing style, by the language, by the choices that the author makes, needs to build up readers intellectually. These shelves are my adult classics novels, so not books that I'm ready to pass on to my kids. So L.M. Montgomery, C.S. Lewis's children's works, J.R.R. Tolkien, all of those I actually have on a shelf down in our main area so that the kids can access them. These are books that are adult classics. So I have alphabetized just this shelf. I kept Googe separate and the Brontes and the Alcotts and Gene Stratton Porter because they really are my favorites. So we have this Christmas Treasury book by Louisa May Alcott. This is a gorgeous book, and it has inside of it all of her Christmas short stories. There are no photographs. It's a recent publish of 2002 by River Oak. Next I have Louisa May Alcott's 8 Cousins. It is linen covered. This was published by Random House in 1995. This reminded me so much of L.M. Montgomery because we follow Rose Campbell, who is an orphan, and she ends up leaving the boarding school that she was attending and going and living with kind of distant relatives. And the focus is more on being outside and being in nature and not being confined with corsets and having an uncle who was boisterous and vivacious. I love Louisa May Alcott, and this was one of my favorite books of hers to read. Rose sat all alone in the big best parlor with her little handkerchief laid ready to catch the first tear, for she was thinking of her troubles, and a shower was expected. Also, at the risk of you already knowing this, when you take old books off, you should not ever pull from the top because it can ruin that binding there. So you just do have to be gentle. And then I have Rosenbloom. This is the sequel to 8 Cousins. And this is when, after Rose has found herself outside of the corsets in the limited society of boarding school by living with her family, this is the sequel in which she really does develop into herself and bloom. This one was published in 1933. Next we have Little Women. This is an illustrated junior library edition. And it is from 1947, and it has gorgeous illustrations. And I've already told my daughter that when it comes time for her to read Little Women, we will get her version from the library because this will stay on the shelf. And then, of course, we have Joe's Boys, beautiful ribbon bookmark, beautiful hardback cover, and it has some black and white images. This is mine from when I was growing up. And this is an international collector's library. Then I have this little men. And this is also an illustrated junior library version. This was also published in 1947. Next, I have this Wuthering Heights and Jane Eyre set. They came in this case. They are gorgeous as well. Just so gorgeous. I love the covers. This was written in 1943. It has these just such perfect fall vibe, black and white engravings. And then Wuthering Heights, which same thing with these black and white engravings by Fritz Eichenberg. I mean, look at Heathcliff in here. Next, I have Agatha Christie. She's definitely not at 100 years old, but I still include her on my classics shelf. This is Halloween Party. I love it because of the orange that's on the top and the orange letters. It's not my favorite Agatha Christie, but I will not ever get rid of this book because it just has such a fall aesthetic. You really shouldn't pack your books in so tight that you can't get your fingers in to pull the book out. If you pull the book from the top, it can cause damage to the spine. And then I have these 5 Miss Marple novels and 5 Poirot novels. I also have this Complete Sherlock Holmes 1. There's actually a version 2. I got this at our library sale for a really great price, and I am probably going to try to find the second part of this set on eBay so that I have them all, because this doesn't have the Hounds of Baskerville, which I really would like to include in the collection. And then I have these 5 books here. These are Elizabeth Goudge. She is an author that I love and that I want to read more of. So I also have Elizabeth Goudge's Little White Horse, and I have her Lynette's and Valerian's. Both of those are more middle grade, and so I have them on a shelf that my kids can access. And they're also not vintage like these are. This is my favorite one. It is missing its dust jacket. It is The Scent of Water, and it was written in 1963. I've got Green Dolphin Street by Elizabeth Goudge. This version was published in 1944. This might be one of her most famous books since it was turned into a movie. I have this mass market paperback of The White Witch. This is a story of the Civil War in England in the 1600s between the Puritans and the Royalists. Just as with most of her books, there is magic in here, which is one of my favorite things about Elizabeth Goudge, is that she is a God-fearing woman and has a very beautiful way of detailing someone's relationship with God, whether they're turning to God or in struggles, but she always infuses it with magic, and I love it. Here is Gentian Hill. Again, with the linen covered hardback. It came with a 1950s Literary Guild review of the book, and the paper cover is struggling, but I have kept it and tried to keep it repaired. This is very 1970s, The Child from the Sea, published in New York in 1970. And I have not yet read this. It is a chunker, 736 pages. For Elizabeth Goudge, that is a chunker. Here's a picture of her on the back with her dog. I then have Jean Stratton Porter. She's most well known for The Girl of the Limberlost. There's not a lot of illustrations in it, but there is a little black and white drawing on every page. You have to read The Girl of the Limberlost, but The Keeper of the Bees is probably my favorite, even beyond The Girl of the Limberlost. This version was published in 1925. I would highly recommend Keeper of the Bees. And then Freckles. This was published in 1904. So this is a really old version of Freckles. So I have not read it yet. I will. I think it follows The Girl of the Limberlost. It's the second one of that. As I continue to watch and make more booktube videos on YouTube, I will see that some people in their to be read list are including a classic here or there. I know in Victober, a lot of people are reading Victorian novels. Victober is a great time of year when people really share classics. So I'll leave some channels below that I have found have information on classics, but I was feeling like there wasn't a lot of information about classics out there. So I searched, and it seemed like the trend was to choose kind of a publishing series. So you would have a certain publisher, and it could have been Puffin or Bantam, a lot of different publishers and imprints that would choose a certain kind of theme to publish these classics in. And frankly, a lot of them are beautiful. And I even have a few of them, which I will show. But something to me that is important in getting a classic shelf tour is including those vintage copies. So with my classic shelf tour, I have a hodgepodge of vintage, some new, some mass paperback from the 70s and 80s. And so I just wanted to share the classics that I have loved, that have impacted me, left a print on my heart of remembering what I was going through when I was reading it, or remembering the person that gave it to me and inscribed in it. Or I have a few that were my grandmother's that she bequeathed to me. And so next I have another shelf. These are also alphabetized starting with A over here. These are authors and books that I love or that have had a great impact on me, but they're not Alcott or Goodge or Jean Stratton Porter or the Brontes. So I have Jane Austen, which I love. Emma's my least favorite. Sorry to anyone who loves Emma. This is obviously a newer print from 2004. These are probably my two most modern ones. They are from Paper Mill Press, and they are wild as far as I'm concerned. It's 2018 and 2019 that they were published. I think one of my least favorite parts of it is they didn't use up much of the page. So it's like they printed it using a previous smaller book version and didn't change the font and the typeset or anything, and just printed on larger paper and bound it in this book. I do wish it had taken up more, so much white space. It does have the ribbon in it. And I have read these two already, so I have not read these specific versions. This was my Christmas gift. It is Pride and Prejudice, which has the actual letters in it that you can pull out. So you can take the letter out and read the letters. Because of that, it is bound really uniquely. You can see that. And then I have these two annotated, Northanger Abbey and Mansfield Park. And it is a chunker. This Mansfield Park is almost 900 pages. But the thing that I love about it is it explains the writing to you. So, for instance, on page 464, he had heard her speak of the pleasure of such a journey with an animation which had no, in quotation marks, in every tone. And so then it goes in to explain this is due to social norms dictating that a woman, especially a genteel one, travel with a male escort, usually a relative. It helps them prevent danger of any impropriety. It explains the language and what was going on in the culture of the time for why something would be stated the way it is. And then I have the Swiss Family Robinson vintage copy. I love the images that are in these old versions. I have Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. And then I have all of these Charles Dickens. Honestly, I loved Bleak House so much. Probably my favorite Charles Dickens that I've read. Look how creepy Scrooge looks. I have Crime and Punishment by Dostoevsky. And it has these dark, sort of like chalk drawings. I have Lost Horizon by Hilton. This was a gift from my grandmother, which is why it stays on my shelf. It was printed in 1990. I also love the illustration. I've got this gorgeous copy of Moby Dick by Herman Melville. It is illustrated by Rockwell Kent. It was published in 1930. Rockwell Kent is a well-known book illustrator. I have Gone with the Wind by Margaret Mitchell. This was my grandmother's. There are no illustrations in this 1964 copy, but I remember staying up until 3 o'clock in the morning to finish this when I was in high school. Even though this technically isn't a classic, my grandmother gave me this the following year after she gave me that one. And I know this because she wrote that in her inscription. This was published in 1991, so she gave it to me the year it came out. And it is the sequel to Gone with the Wind, and it is written by Alexandra Ripley, who is the author that was chosen by Margaret Mitchell's family to write the series. Frankenstein by Mary Shelley, and there are annotations at the bottom. Every chapter starts with that. And here's the creature. I don't know if you've read this, but hopefully you realize where this is. I mean, when I see this picture, I'm immediately taken back to how he was feeling, this creature. Such a great book. The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. I did this in a fall vlog. I think I read it when I was younger, but did not remember it. This little tiny slim copy, you could have so much to say and study about it. Just delves into addiction, and I would say it's my favorite of Robert Louis Stevenson's. And then I have Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy, which is also a gorgeous book. I love the illustrations by Fritz Eichenberg, who is the same guy who illustrated my Jane Eyre and Wuthering Heights. Obviously a beautiful version. So up on the top, this shelf is also alphabetized, but these are all paperbacks that would fit on this shelf. So the way the shelving went, this area was just a little bit shorter. And so I had to fit kind of all of my petite books. And so it's almost all mass market paperbacks. Almost. I have The Bridge Over the River Kwai, and that is a book that I read when I was in high school, and it just had such an impact on me. It was published in 1964. It even has the movie picture on the back. So then I have Willa Cather, My Antonia. It is my preferred Willa Cather. It's probably the only one I'll ever have on my shelf. I have The Awakening by Kate Chopin from 1976. A dear friend of mine gave me this in high school, and she was right. It is a favorite, and I do love it. I have The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas. This is 1966. I have The Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison. Highly recommend reading that book. I think there's a lot of strong opinions about it, but I think everyone should at least read it. Next is my huge tome of Middlemarch by George Eliot. Barnes & Noble classic version. It is a chunker. It is all 8 books. And then I also have Silas Marner by George Eliot. And I love things like this that provide character. Notes from other people in it. There's Old Master Marner. And this version was published in 1952. I also have The Great Gatsby, Alas Babylon by Pat Frank. Alas Babylon's one of my favorite books. On the Trail of the Assassins, this is not at all a classic. It is about the assassination of John F. Kennedy, and I really think everyone should read it. These two are Thomas Hardy. I have loved Thomas Hardy since I was young. So I read Tess of D'Urbervilles when I was in high school, and then I just read Far from the Madding Crowd this summer and loved it and love him. A Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. The Scarlet Letter by Nathaniel Hawthorne. It is a Dover Thrift edition, which I think they say it's inexpensive versions that can get into the hands of anybody. Hence the name Thrift. This is published in 1994. Just love getting old copies that have people's notes and highlightings in them. Some of them are mine. This one actually is not. I found this one in a little free library, I think, and grabbed it. The Stand, not a classic, at least not yet, but it should be. Written in 1978, obviously not 100 years old. Of all of Stephen King's novels that I've read, this is the one that stays on my shelf. I loved the Gunslinger series, but this one has kept its place on my shelf in my mind as a classic. To Kill a Mockingbird. And then we have Till We Have Faces by C.S. Lewis. Written in 1954, published in 1985. This is the reworking of the classic myth of Cupid and Psyche. It is a phenomenal adult C.S. Lewis novel. Of The Giver by Lois Lowry. And I realized I said at the beginning of this that these are kind of my adult books and that I have another shelf with middle grade and ones that are more age appropriate. And I have seen The Giver on younger age groups. But for me, with the euthanization, I feel like the culling of a society through children, to me, is a very adult theme and not for middle grade or kids. It is a very difficult concept. It was a very memorable read for me, and so it keeps its place on my shelf, but it will stay on the adult shelves. The Thornbirds. Listen, unless you've read it, don't knock it. Published in 1977, similar to was when The Stand was. So it's like a family saga set in Australia. I think there's like a TV show or a movie from the 70s, maybe the 80s. Kind of want to read this again, actually, as I'm holding it in my hand. I've got a few Toni Morrison on here. George Orwell. I just love this cover. Catherine Patterson. Ayn Rand. I kind of want to read this one again. The Catcher in the Rye. The Jungle. That is a very difficult book to read. A Tree Grows in Brooklyn. Grapes of Wrath, Of Mice and Men, and The Pearl. Let me tell you, I leave them on this shelf because of their cultural significance, but Grapes of Wrath is one of my least favorite books. I've got Kidnapped by Robert Louis Stevenson, Uncle Tom's Cabin by Harriet Beecher Stowe, Pudd'nhead Wilson by Mark Twain. My other Mark Twains are downstairs on the kids' shelf. And then I have 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea by Jules Verne, and then I have All the King's Men by Robert Penn Warren. I keep this one because there's a lot of notes in here that just make me laugh. Thanks so much for watching. If you know of channels that have a lot of classic books being shared, please leave it in the comments below so that I can check them out. I would love to hear what your favorite classics are. I would love to hear what classics you didn't like, because I know that there are classics that did not make it into this video because I did not like them and they did not get to keep a space on my shelf. And I'd love to hear what your favorites and not so favorites are. I hope that this has maybe inspired you to look into classics. If you are interested in getting into them but aren't sure maybe what to read, feel free to leave a comment below so we can chat a little bit about maybe what might strike your fancy. I might be able to help with that. So until next time.